Claims that up to 20 Indonesian children are currently locked up in WA jails. They're calling on the government to release the boys who've been incarcerating under people smuggling laws. Many of them worked on asylum seeker boats as cooks and deckhands. One of the boys, who's said to be 16, is in an adult prison in Perth working alongside sex offenders. Gerry Georgatos is from the Human Rights Alliance and has visited that Indonesian boy, and he joins us now from Perth. Gerry, what can you tell us about the boy that you visited in jail?
Well, I met the boy in question, the youth in question, in January at the Perth Detention Centre, the Airport Detention Centre, and he struck me as quite young. Visiting other prisoners in February, I actually learnt that he'd been arrested and taken to Haiti, and that actually surprised me because I was pretty sure that he was only about 14, 15 or 16, couldn't be any more than that. So I organised to have a visit with him in March, on March the 18th, and apparently on March the 17th was his birthday, so he turned 16 the day before of the visit. Now, I spent an hour with him, and he affirmed to me a number of times over in front of a witness who had actually also come that he is 16, was born in 1995, but on the premise of a wrist bone age scan conducted by the Australian Federal Police in Darwin when he was in immigration in Darwin. They've premised the fact that he was born in 1991. They've accepted the 17th of March, ludicrously, and not accepted the fact that he was born in 1995. All the information that the Australian Federal Police have and our Department of Corrective Services and the courts at this stage are a bone scan. Now,
So Gerry, how do you know that he is 16?
Well, one, I can't sit here and actually say absolutely that I've seen evidence to unequivocally state that he is whatever age he alleges to be. I believe 100% that he's 16. I've also contacted his family. I've been able to get his phone number to his family in Batam in Indonesia, an island in Indonesia, and I've spoken to his brother. Now, his brother has affirmed to me that he's actually 16 years of age, born in 1995. He's given me meticulous details of the school that he actually attended. He graduated from junior high, according to the family, in 2009, a Year 9 level, so it was the equivalent Year 9 level, which would put him at 14 years of age. However, also, I informed the Indonesian consulate on March the 18th that they had one of their nationals on our shores, in our jails, and they also contacted the family, and the Vice Consul, the Perth Vice Consul, actually affirmed to me that she had confirmed or affirmed from the family that he was also born in 1995. Now, all we've got is a bone scan that argues otherwise. My question is, why hasn't the Commonwealth, why haven't the relevant authorities actually taken upon themselves the onus to ascertain through appropriate age determination, through the relevant authorities, all working with the consular officials to gain a proper knowledge of his age?
Gerry, in Australia we don't allow 18-year-olds to be in jail. They end up in juvenile detention. If he is 16, why is he allowed to be inside a jail?
Well, I could sit here and unveil the layers of discrimination that we've actually knocked up in the last couple of decades and the racism that goes with it. But I think you've hit the nutshell there. And that is the question that I've asked. There isn't an authority that doesn't know that we have potentially up to 60 in this country out of the last 154 people alleged to be people smugglers who, in my book, aren't people smugglers anyway, nevertheless not cooks and deckhands. 60 out of 154, that's an incredible number. We've had incidences where the decision has been overturned when evidence has been proven otherwise or supplied from Indonesia. We had a 14-year-old in an Australian jail for 12 months sentenced, and after the magistrate received what he considered substantive evidence, he was released and at the magistrate's instruction deported home to Indonesia. Now in WA today, the state Labor MLA backed me and said that there is thereabouts probably 20 of our Indonesian folk who are actually underage in our jails. And one thing has disturbed me. Like last year, I visit jails on unofficial and official basis. And last year I went into Hakea Correctional Facility to visit Aboriginal folk and push, educational programs. And I remember walking past a English language class, which was actually 20 Indonesian fishermen. I actually walked in and had a yarn with them. They had been sentenced to 5 years for people smuggling, for fishing off the boat or cooking or being deckhands. And they were off to Albany jail because Hakea, by the way, is a remand facility, 85% remand. Now, I spoke to the folk. I was actually quite disturbed that people get 5 years for doing very little, for aiding people from a humanitarian perspective to, have safe passage in terms of asylum. However, what struck me at that time was how young a number of them looked. And I was pretty sure they were 14, 15, 16. However, at that time, I had an investiture of faith and goodwill in the system that we obviously have appropriate age-determined protocols, and that wouldn't be a question. However, looking back now, there's an immense question in my mind, how many of those were actually underage, and I think that we should initiate a review of all cases that have come before our courts on the premise that they're perceived people smugglers, and that we should actually have age determination protocols.
Gerry, Cara Griner's got a question for you. Cara?
Yeah, Gerry, I was just wondering, are these youths actually represented by any legal aid solicitors or any form of legal representation?
Yes, legal aid is the form of representation they actually have for the most part. Like the Brisbane lawyers that actually took up the case for the 3 youths up there were pro bono efforts, and we've actually got pro bono lawyers also from the Australian Lawyers Alliance who want to take up this particular case. Now, this kid has had legal aid, and he's had 4 lawyers from legal aid, but from my understanding, and I'm not casting an aspersion on the lawyers per se, because I know one of them and he's a good chap. However, I don't believe the work's been done, and I believe that legal aid itself is actually stressed through labour resource management issues. However, I do have a problem. I don't understand why the lawyers, be it legal aid, whomever, don't pick up a phone and actually call the family or work with the consular officials or try and ascertain the age of the person in question beyond reasonable doubt. But
Gerry,
the big
can I just interrupt and ask you, are people who are on the boat who may be working as deckhands or as cooks, are they under the law treated differently to the people who organise people smuggling, the people that the Australian Federal Police are trying to prosecute?
Well, that's a tough question. In my book, they're all treated the same. However, we have seen instances of those who are actually considered agents, and they get longer sentences than the mandated 5-year that we now have. But once upon a time, in the early 2000s, 10 years ago, the sentences that they were actually receiving for aiding and abetting, presumably, in terms of the passage, were 6 months, a year, 2 years, and it's now escalated to 5 years for very little. However, the difference, yes, they are treated differently too, but they can't be actually considered people smugglers because they're being charged under 232, Section 232 and 233 of the Migration Act. And if we actually follow that Migration Act in terms of its detail, they can't be charged. It's anathema what's actually going on. And several years ago, we had 27 legal experts who spoke to a Senate Estimates inquiry that actually affirmed unequivocally that none of these people are actually people smugglers, that they shouldn't be charged and can't be charged for what little they're actually doing in terms of aiding people who are lawfully seeking asylum.
Tom, you got a question?
Yeah, Gerry, I've only read the piece in the Fairfax Press on this, but how are those cooks and deckhands actually chosen to be a part of this? What's the process behind that?
Well, that's varied in itself. I've heard a number of stories from, various people who have been charged as perceived people smugglers. Some have come here believing that they're not doing anything wrong, that they're actually just, doing the passage, assisting, being deckhands and cooks, and that they'll be returned immediately after the trip, and that they'll score, for their impoverished families anything between $100 to $500. Others have actually, alleged an almost Shanghai situation. They've been inebriated, they've been talked into a situation, and especially when you're 15, 16, 17, I can actually see where, that could have been the case. However, most of them don't actually understand that they're going to be charged in our country for offences or whatever, right, that they didn't perceive in the first instance actually is an offence. And this particular boy in question has pled not guilty because at no point in time has he actually understood or considered that what he was doing was actually wrong.
The boy you're talking about, is it true that his family didn't actually know that he was in a jail in Australia?
That's true. This is the detail that, authorities could have actually discovered, and I'm actually stunned that they didn't pick up the phone to actually do what I did and what leading journalists have done and what lawyers, in other cases similar to these have actually done. But the brother, who I actually spoke to, has told me that the boy, his brother, is actually quite spooked, doesn't understand what's actually happening around him, is confused with all the attention, doesn't understand why he's in jail. They hadn't known for a year where he was. No one had actually contacted them, and it's only when he finished up in February, after 10 months in immigration detention, predominantly in Darwin, that he contacted his family, because he had a phone and permissibility to contact family, as he put it to me, and he spoke to his brother and his mum, and they're now in regular contact. But for a year they didn't know where he was. They didn't know that he was in Australia, and they didn't know that he was on a boat, to assist asylum seekers safe passage to our shores.
Just a quick final question from Cara.
Yeah, Gerry, do you think that perhaps the government's view is, well, if we, make it as difficult as possible for people who, are under the age of 18, this will at least in some way stop the people smugglers manning their boats with essentially these young children?
Well, if they're doing that, that's moral and legal impropriety. Look, I'll put it, you can't go around doing what the law doesn't prescribe, and you can't take that sort of authoritarian power upon yourself or whatever to abuse people who are under the age of 19, whether they be 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, to use them as some sort of mechanism to, scare off people to assist others in the transportation of safe passage to our shores of asylum seekers. But the reason they've actually done this, in my book, is because, one, they've just turned a blind eye, and there's a lack of ethos of care. One, and also I believe that we actually have at this time a racist set of policies, and that we've degenerated to the worst of even what the Howard, Vanstone, Ruddock era actually produced. And it's a great shame upon ourselves if our children, our Australian children born and bred, were in Indonesian jails, were in Malaysian jails, that were adult prisons. We would have an international incident. We would be condemning them through the various courts and mechanisms available to us or whatever, right?
Okay.
And we wouldn't accept under... Yeah, okay.
Gerry Georgatos, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks for coming on The Drum tonight.
Thank you, people.